Risk is a strategy board game produced by Parker Brothers. Winning Moves also makes a classic 1959 version. It was invented by French film director Albert Lamarissa and originally released in 1957 as La Conquête du Monde in France. It was later bought by Parker Brothers and released in 1959 with some modifications to the rules as Risk. The Continental game, then as Risk, the game of global domination. Risk is a turn-based game for 2 to 6 players. The standard version is played on a board depicting a political map of the Earth, divided into 42 territories, which are grouped into 6 continents. The object of the game is to occupy every territory on the board and in doing so, eliminate the other players. Players control armies with which they attempt to capture territories from other players, with results determined by dice rolls. Equipment and design. Each Risk game comes with a number of different colored tokens denoting troops. In the first editions, the playing pieces were wooden cubes representing 1 troop each and a few rounded triangular prisms representing 10 troops each. But in later versions of the game these pieces were molded of plastic to reduce costs. In the 1980s, these were changed to pieces shaped into the Roman numerals I, 3, V, and X. The 1993 edition introduced plastic infantry tokens, cavalry, and artillery. The 40th Anniversary Collector's Edition contained the same troop pieces but made of metal rather than plastic. In the 2005 Bookcase edition, playing pieces are once again wooden cubes. These token types are purely a convention for ease of representing a specific army size. Standard equipment also includes 5 dice in 2 colors. 3 red dice for the attacker, and 2 white or blue dice for the defender. Also included is a total of 72 Risk cards. 42 of these depict territories, in addition to a symbol of an infantry, cavalry, or artillery piece. One of these cards is awarded to a player at the end of each turn if the player has successfully conquered at least 1 territory during that turn. No more than 1 card may be awarded per turn. If a player collects either 3 cards with the same symbol, or 1 of each, or 2 different and a wild card, they may be traded in for reinforcements at the beginning of a player's turn. These cards can also be used for game setup. Also included are 2 wild cards that depict an infantry, cavalry, and artillery piece, as opposed to 1 of the 3 and a territory. Because these cards have all 3 symbols, they can match with any 2 other cards to form a set. 28 mission cards also come with the game to be used in the Secret Mission Risk rule variant. In the 40th Anniversary Collector's Edition, the movement route between the territories of East Africa and Middle East was removed. This was later confirmed to be a manufacturing error, an error repeated in Risk 2. Subsequent editions restored the missing route. While the European versions of Risk had included the variation Secret Mission Risk for some time, the US version did not have this added until 1993. Setup. Standard. Each player first counts out a number of infantry for initial deployment. The number of starting armies depends on the number of players. If 2 are playing, then each player counts out 40 infantry, plus 40 more from a different color set. This third set is neutral and only defends if attacked. If 3 are playing, each player counts out 35 infantry, 4 players, 30 infantry, 5 players, 25 infantry, 6 players, 20 infantry. Players then take turns claiming territories by placing an infantry on an unoccupied territory until all the territories are occupied. Players then take turns placing their remaining armies on their territories. Having done this, the actual game begins with another roll of a dice, which is used to determine the playing order. Alternative and quicker method of setup from the original French rules is to deal out the deck of Risk cards minus the wild cards, assigning players to the territories on their cards. As in a standard game, players still count out the same number of starting infantry and take turns placing their armies. The original rules from 1959 state that the entire deck of risk cards is dealt out, assigning players to the territories on their cards. One and only one army is placed on each territory before the game commences. Player turn. There are three main phases to a player's turn: getting and placing new armies, attacking, and fortifying. Getting and placing new armies. Players draft new armies and then distribute these pieces to any of their territories at the beginning of their turn. The number of armies a player may draft hinges upon three factors: number of territories owned, continent bonus, and redeeming risk cards. To calculate the number of armies drafted for number of territories owned, players divide their total number of territories by 3 and round down to the nearest integer. If this result is less than 3, round up to 3 armies. Players also receive bonus armies for occupying an entire continent. Lastly, players may receive armies for turning in a set of 3 risk cards. A set may consist of the 3 different army units or be 3 of a kind. If the player has 5 cards, the player must trade in a set. The first set to be turned is worth 4 reinforcements, the second is worth 6, third, 8, fourth, 10, fifth, 12, 6th, 15, and for every additional set thereafter 5 more armies than the previous set turned in. The number of reinforcements received is shown by a golden cavalry which moves along a grid every time a set is traded in. The probability of having a tradable set of cards when holding 3 cards is 42.28%, 81.70% holding 4 cards, and 100% holding 5 cards. The player places these armies on any of his territories. If a player owns one or more of the territories depicted on the set of turned-in cards, the player may choose one of these territories to be awarded 2 additional armies that must be placed in that territory. Attacking. When it is a player's turn to attack, the player can only attack territories that are adjacent to or connected by a sea lane to a territory already held. A battle's outcome is decided by rolling dice. The attacking player attacks with an army, rolling up to 3 dice. At least one unit must remain behind in the attacking territory not involved in the attack, as a territory may never be left unoccupied. Before the attacker rolls, the defender must resist the attack with either 1 or 2 armies by rolling 1 or 2 dice. Each player's highest die is compared, as is their second highest die. In each comparison, the highest number wins. The defender wins in the event of a tie. With each dice comparison, the loser removes 1 army from his territory from the game board. Any extra dice are disregarded and do not affect the results. If an attack eliminates the final defending army within a territory, the attacker then must occupy the newly conquered territory with at least the number of attacking armies used in the last round of attack. There is no limit to the total number of additional armies that may be sent in to occupy, providing at least 1 army remains behind in the original attacking territory. Players may attack any number of territories any number of times before yielding the turn to the next player. Attacking is optional. A player may decline to attack at all during the turn. If an attacker occupies a defender's last territory, the defender is eliminated from the game and the attacker acquires all of the defender's risk cards. If the conquering player then holds 5 or more cards, the player must trade in sets until the player has fewer than 5. The gained armies are placed immediately. If, at the end of attacking, at least 1 territory was conquered that turn, the player draws a risk card from the deck, fortifying when finished attacking and before passing the turn over to the next player. A player has the option to maneuver any number of armies from a single territory occupied by the player into an adjacent territory occupied by the same player. This is sometimes referred to as a free move. Under an alternate rule, the maneuvering armies may travel through as many territories to their final destination as desired, providing that all involved pass-through territories are connected and occupied by that same player. As always, at least 1 army must be left in the originating territory. However, the player can only distribute between 2 territories. Play then proceeds clockwise to the next player. Strategy. Basic strategy. The official rulebook gives 3 basic strategy tips for the classic rules. Players should control entire continents to get the bonus reinforcement armies. Players should watch their borders for build-ups of armies that could imply an upcoming attack. Players should build up armies on their own borders for better defense. Holding continents is the most common way to increase reinforcements. Players often attempt to gain control of Australia early in the game, since Australia is the only continent that can be successfully defended by heavily fortifying one country. Generally, continents with fewer borders are easier to defend as they possess fewer points that can be attacked by other players. South America has 2 access points, North America and Africa each have 3, Europe has 4, and Asia has 5. Generally, it is thought advisable to hold risk cards until they can be turned in for maximum reinforcements. This is especially true earlier on in gameplay, because extra armies make a greater difference in the beginning of the game. Eliminating a weak player who holds a large number of risk cards is also a good strategy, since players who eliminate their opponents get possession of their opponent's risk cards. In this case, trading in risk cards earlier may help acquire the necessary troops. If the conquering player has 6 or more risk cards after taking the cards of another player, the cards must be immediately turned in for reinforcements until the player has fewer than 5 cards and then may continue attacking. Turtling is a defensive strategy where a player who feels vulnerable tries to become too expensive to be removed while remaining a threat to harass other players. The objective of this strategy is to avoid defeat. A player using this strategy might remain in the game all the way to later stages and then mount an attack on the weakest player and start a chain elimination to remove one player after another to win the game. The player who uses this strategy is called a turtle. The term was popularized in real-time strategy games where a player creates a defensive perimeter or turtle shell around the base of operations. Solutions to counteract this strategy using cooperation have been proposed by Sanhoneri. Alliances. The rules of Risk neither endorse nor prohibit alliances or truces. Thus players often form unofficial treaties for various reasons, such as safeguarding themselves from attacks on one border while they concentrate their forces elsewhere, or eliminating a player who has grown too strong. Because these agreements are not enforceable by the rules, these agreements are often broken. Alliance making. Breaking can be one of the most important elements of the game, and it adds human interaction to a decidedly probabilistic game. Some players allow trading of risk cards, but only during their turn. This optional rule makes alliances more powerful. Dice probabilities. Defenders always win ties when dice are rolled. This gives the defending player the advantage in one-on-one fights, but the attacker's ability to use more dice offsets this advantage, as indicated in the dice probability charts below. Actually capturing a territory depends on the number of attacking and defending armies, and the associated probabilities can be expressed analytically, using Markov chains, or studied numerically using stochastic simulation. It is always advantageous to roll the maximum number of dice, unless an attacker wishes to avoid moving men into a dead-end territory, in which case he may choose to roll fewer than 3. The table below states the probabilities of all possible outcomes of one attacker dice roll and one defender dice roll. Green indicates an advantage to the attacker and red italic an advantage to the defender. Thus, when rolling 3 dice against 2 dice, 3 against 1, or 2 against 1, the attacker has a slight advantage. Otherwise, the defender has an advantage. When large armies face off, a player will tend to gain a greater advantage over his opponent by attacking rather than defending. The following table shows the probabilities that the attacker wins a whole battle between 2 countries. Green indicates an advantage to the attacker, and red italic an advantage to the defender. The number of attacking armies does not include the minimum 1 army that must be left behind in the territory. There are online tools available to compute the outcome of whole campaigns. Risico. Variation odds. Risico is a variant of the game released in Italy, in which the defender is allowed to roll up to 3 dice to defend. This variation dramatically shifts the balance of power towards defense. As shown in the following table, a defender in this variation has a 1 in 5 chance of holding a country with 3 defenders against 8 armies in a whole battle. For comparison, under the standard rules 3 armies would only have 1 in 19 chance of holding a country against all-out attack by 8. Rule variations. Over the years, Parker Brothers and Hasbro have published many different editions of rules for the game. 2-player Risk. This 2-player version is played according to the traditional rules of Risk. Each player takes 40 armies and alternately places 1 army on an unoccupied territory until each has occupied 14 territories. The remaining armies are alternately distributed on the occupied territories. The remaining 14 territories are occupied by a force called the Allied Army. These armies are composed of playing pieces different in color from those used by the 2 players. 2 Allied armies will be placed on each unoccupied territory for a total of 28 armies. Each player attacks according to the traditional rules. A player may attack the other player or the Allied army. When a player attacks the Allied army, the other player rolls the dice for the Allied army. The game ends when one player loses all his territories. If the Allied army loses all its territories, gameplay is continued according to the traditional rules. Capital Risk. Each player has of capital in one of the initially occupied territories. The player to capture all capitals wins. Any armies and territories that belong to the losing nation are turned over to the victor. Capital Risk often leads to much shorter games. Secret Mission. Secret Mission Risk was the standard game in European editions for some decades and was introduced to US editions in 1993. This form of play gives each player a specific mission short of complete world domination. Players do not reveal their missions to each other until the end of the game. The game ends when the first person to complete his mission reveals his secret mission card, thereby winning. In 2003, a different secret mission version of the game was released, in which each player received 4 secret missions to complete. The original missions in the 1993 US edition are: Capture Europe, Australia and 1 other continent. Capture Europe, South America and 1 other continent. Capture North America and Africa. Capture North America and Australia. Capture Asia and South America. Capture Asia and Africa. Capture 24 territories. Capture 18 territories and occupy each with 2 troops. Destroy all armies of a specific color or, if one's own troops are that color, capture 24 territories. Note: in the UK edition, if a player's mission is to destroy all armies of a particular color, and another player kills off the last armies of that color, their mission changes to capturing 24 territories. In the US edition, no matter who eliminates the last army, the player with the mission wins automatically. Alternate card turn-in rules. In some editions, the cards display either 1 or 2 stars. Cards may be exchanged to draft a number of armies depending on the sum of these stars according to the table below. Cards may be accumulated as long as the player wishes. The new armies are immediately deployed in any combination across the player's occupied territories. If an objective has been accomplished on the player's turn, that player is prohibited from also drawing a risk card on that turn. The territory on the card is irrelevant when drafting troops. An additional card exchange regime is to offer a fixed number of armies depending on the emblem on the card. 3 infantry would receive 4 armies, 3 cavalry would receive 6 armies, 3 cannons would receive 8 armies, and 1 of each emblem would receive 10 armies. Yet another card exchange regime follows the escalating exchange rules. But after awarding 15 armies for the 6th exchange set, the number is reset to the original 4 armies before increasing again with each exchange. Other rule variations. The official rulebook suggests variations to the gameplay mechanics for risk experts, any or all of which can be used, depending on player preference. These suggestions include reducing the rate at which risk card sets increase in value so that they only go up by 1 each time, allowing for armies to move to any controlled territory if it has contiguity between it and its destination, granting an attack advantage when attacking from more to a territory for which the attacker holds a risk card, granting attackers the ability to change one of the dice rolled so that a 6 is showing. An attacker may do this only once per turn. In addition to these official variations, many computer and internet versions have different rules, and gaming clubs often use house rules or competition-adjusted rules. These may include structure such as forts, free play, or other rules. There have been other variations of risk, essentially house rules, complete with titles like Ultimate Risk,